Tales of Mithrym.
At the Sign of the Running Horse, narrated by Dolynuik, Part 5, Proficiency. The captain's eyes fell upon the short sword attached to Elvin's waist. That's an unusual-looking blade. I think I've seen that sword carried by a nobleman before. Is it perhaps a family heirloom? Elvin laughed out loud. My apologies, but the only heirloom I received was a ring that belonged to my grandfather, and I sold it in a town near the front lines a couple of years ago because I didn't want people killing me to steal it. Then how did you end up with that? She continued. I beg your pardon, but it's the first time I've seen such a fine weapon up close. It's a long story, ma'am. I'm sure it would only serve to bore you. Not at all. Please, let's hear it. She was looking at Elvin with wide, curious eyes. I won't be able to stop thinking about it if I don't hear it now. Elvin sighed. All right, I give up. He unstrapped his sword and put it on the counter between the two of them. She pored over it but held back from touching it. This is, he said, channeling the dry words of the old officer that had presented him with it, the holy sword of the Light Crusader. Though some call it Octomon because legend has it that it can, with attunement, grow 8 monstrous blades. He sighed. Anyway, it once belonged to General Cedric Smythe, gifted to him by Queen Mary herself. During the Battle of Blood Valley, I somehow managed to slay the Dark General Lucas. The dog was so evil, people called him the Living Violence. Imagine that. So, after that, our dear General Smythe called me to his chamber where he gathered all the high-ranking officers, promoted me in the field, and gifted me this. The captain hung on his words. He told me I was 10 times more worthy of it than he was. The captain's eyes sparkled. She seemed mesmerized hearing such a tale. That must have been such a meaningful achievement, eh? How did it make you feel? Nothing, said Elvin, and resumed eating. She seemed baffled, but the utterly blank look in his eyes and the hollow sound in his voice somehow discouraged her from asking more. She watched him for a moment. After a while, she cleared her throat and said, pointing to the sword, How do you carry it just like that? I mean, this thing must be worth 100 times more than whatever ring you had on you, right? Aren't you afraid of getting ambushed for it too? He looked at her. I mean no offense, of course, she added quickly. It's just... Elvin smiled. It's okay. I'm not invincible. I wish, but not even close. He looked thoughtful for a moment. This doesn't get stolen probably because it has a mind of its own. Really? Fascinating. Elvin sighed. At any rate, it seems that this sword can somehow recognize its master. There was a ritual when I was given it. They erased the general's name and etched mine onto the blade. It was a very complex process, and I cannot explain it to you properly. The point is, this sword will only listen to me and me alone. It understands my thoughts and what I want to do with it. If, let us say, it were stolen, then the sword would simply not be very useful or valuable because it would be just a lump of cheap steel, useless in any other hand than mine. And if I were killed, then this sword will lose all its blessings and become a very worthless piece of junk. I think that's why I'm not afraid of it being stolen. The captain's eyes glittered again. Will you show me the blade, please? Elvin picked up the sword. There's also one other reason this thing cannot be stolen. What is it? Said Joyce eagerly. Because it always comes back to me. As he said that, Elvin unsheathed the sword. As the blade undressed, it glinted and shone with the brilliance of an aurora. Elvin held it up in the air, and its body shimmered as if the light was captured inside the metal and was fighting to get out. Gasps could be heard around the room. Elvin noticed Ducky amongst those watching him closely. Then, all of a sudden, he twisted his body, and in one fluid motion he hurled the sword into the crowd, which flinched and gasped aloud. The sword slipped through the gap and plunged into the wood on the opposite wall and stuck there. Elvin simply kept his hand raised. The sword, brayed to its hilt, deep in the wooden beam, trembled as if some invisible hand was shaking it. It then shook free and hurtled back through the crowd again, this time to a small applaud. It sped back and came to rest in Elvin's hand. He casually sheathed it back into its scabbard with a small smile and attached it to the baldric at his waist and returned to his soup. The crowd began cheering and clapping, but Elvin paid it no heed. He was feeling perfectly silly for showing off. It was the weapon he had killed with, and he had flung it around as a party trick. Still, he was also quite surprised to discover that that party trick had no effect whatsoever on the captain. In fact, she was looking rather serious and lost in deep thought. "I forgot that I was dealing with the warden. I beg your pardon for scaring these innocent people," Elvin said apologetically, "though they don't seem to mind it too much." She broke in. "Sorry, what did you say? I wasn't paying attention." Elvin smiled. "Captain, come now. I've given you quite the story. I even gave you a bit of a show. But you still have not said what business brings you here in the middle of the night to the middle of nowhere, where, in point of fact, you do not actually have any jurisdiction." He smiled. "Of course, it's none of my business, but—"
Tales of Mithrym are written by Jimmy Clephane. Mithrym is a fantasy world built for the Dungeon Room role-playing game system. To find out more about the world of Mithrym, or to try out the game, go to www.mithrym.com.